Hello, and welcome again to Talkin CRM. My name is Colin Brogan, and today we have a very special show. Two big surprises. First announcement, I'd like to introduce my new co-host, Megan Heuer, Principal, Heuer B2B. Hi, Megan.
Yay!
Hey, Colin. Hey, Valerie, soon to be introduced guest. Super excited to be the co-host.
And our next big announcement, obviously, is our marquee guest, the fabulous Valerie Peck, founder and leader of not only the East Bay Group, but the Forrester Magic Quadrant crushing SuiteCX. Valerie, welcome.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. The force is strong with all of us old graduates of PRG. I'm thrilled.
Before we get into too many questions, tell us just a bit about SuiteCX and why is the journey mapping imperative so important now for companies?
Well, it's really interesting. Understanding customers and getting insight to what they're thinking, feeling, and doing is, again, a very time-honored thing. Ethnographic research, a lot of people do data and analytics. Pulling those two together is always really interesting. The third really important piece that are missed when you have those two elements alone is the linear fashion in which the process happens. So when you take all of your sales and marketing data and your transactional data, and you remember the old value, needs, and behavior, and you put it out in a linear fashion, it's amazing how much extra insight you get, because the moments of truth that either make people move forward or keep them from moving forward is really an interesting way of looking at things. So a journey map or an experience map, which a lot of people use that interchangeably, gives you a lot more information for different things. Like we call it macro CX, which is acquisition, retention, and growth, also a linear path, or micro CX, which are communications, campaigns, and user experience. So understanding the give and take of what you're presenting to customers, the 7 Ps and your UX in that format just is not replaceable in just looking at data or emotion. So that's why using that concept of mapping it gives you all this information in one spot.
How important is it to, frequently understand the, let's say the pratfalls, pitfalls, and danger areas within a linear experience?
Well, it is very interesting to look at it that way. We tend to look at things like moments of truth and pain points. So the things that are most important to the customer, and that is a big difference right there. Most people approach this with, this is what I want the customer to do, versus this is what the customer wants and needs, right? So once they kind of turn their hat around and do that, understanding where you're either intentionally or not abusing your customers is often very eye-opening for people. So how long they're on hold, listening to the IVR, saying things over and over. In B2B, looking at onboarding is often a very important opportunity that's missed because people rush it rather than take it and use it as an engagement and things like that. Understanding that you can have a lot of great interactions and a terrible experience. That happens all the time. Overtouching, undertouching, right? Everybody gets all excited on onboarding. I had one client that they touched 94 times in 6 weeks. So what do you think you're going to do? They're going to run screaming, right? But they were all trying to do welcome packages. So all of those things really help you understand what's working and what's not. And oftentimes less is more. Tying revenue to that and lowering cost is also a very interesting way of how little can you do to still have a satisfied client is an interesting aspect, especially in times like this when everyone's kind of tightening their belts.
Those companies that work that journey mentality enjoy 14% more customers who are willing to buy another product, 16 who are less reluctant to or more reluctant to switch, and
Mhm.
17% who are more likely to recommend. And if you start to quantify it, we're seeing numbers like for a $10 billion retailer, revenue gains could be, 200 and 300 million a year.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk to me about the forward looking and how journey mapping and specifically, a tool like SuiteCX can help accelerate that process.
Absolutely. So taking all the time-honored things that we do, which you've talked about values, needs, and behavior, and doing a proper segmentation so you know who you're talking to once you've done that, right, is important so that you can actually orchestrate to the people that you think you're talking to, right? Understanding that, first doing a segmentation that's statistical, driving personas, and then mapping the differences in each of those behaviors. So behavior might be their channel usage. Molly Millennial lives with her little, she would never actually consider dialing this, hitting that little green button. It would never happen in a million years. Well, Samantha Senior wants to still chat with somebody because she's, lonely. So understanding the differences in the behaviors and the needs of those groups drops immediately into the user experience, what channel you're going to put them on, the offer, the messaging, and how to get there, right? The test and learn of that so that each of the different segments can have a very personalized experience. And over, uh, we've seen by doing that and by mapping it and by really looking at what's going on and testing it, you can drop 5% onto your bottom line within 4 months. So it's fascinating that this rather tried and true tech approach doesn't need a lot of high technology. It doesn't necessarily need AI or chatbots or a whole lot of stuff. It's basic smart business. And so as you look forward, we have all that technology. And I think Megan and I were talking a little bit before we started this about why people don't actually do this. And I laughingly said because they're afraid of their customers. They actually don't take the time to understand them and to act upon that in enlightened self-interest. So what do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think part of why they're scared of their customers is because they know that hidden in their product, at least in the B2B world, I think this is true very much of the time, hidden in the product are some issues, right? And or hidden in the experience around the product are some issues. And those issues, especially these days, can come from not having enough people or not being able to find the right skills to support the things that you need to do. Maybe a little bit more emphasis on, say, a future product roadmap and not as much on fixing the near-term things that really irritate your current customers. That's all kind of normal course of doing business, but what it leads to is a lot more calls to customer support, a lot more cranky conversations with your customer success person, a lot more grumpy account managers saying, why isn't this being fixed? My customer's really upset. They're not going to renew. And I'll tell you though, you and Colin both mentioned some really compelling numbers about what it's worth to fix some of those things and sort of staff appropriately to get past the things that make you scared of your customers. And I'll tell you the one that I use that works every time for B2B to say, what is it worth? And ask the CFO or ask the head of business ops to help you get the number, but ask what it's worth to improve retention by 1 percentage point. Not 5, not 10, 1.
Yep.
That number in and of itself is generally speaking enough to get people to say,
it's eye-opening.
I'm going to be brave. I'm going to
Yeah.
face my customers and we're going to fix this, because if we do, it will be the making of the business, right? It's the whole idea of retention is a growth strategy in B2B.
Yep. Retention is a strategy everywhere, right? We learned this way back when. It's 4 times more profitable to retain a customer than it is to go and spend the money to acquire them. Yeah. It's something like 10 times more profitable to be able to sell something new. They're your built-in product marketing team because you can ask them what they want. And again, everybody's still out there fishing for the bait for the acquisition, which is fascinating. It's cultural change is so difficult for some companies that they could make enough money just never getting a new customer if they grew the ones and had referrals for the old ones.
Absolutely.
That's really in B2B, especially SaaS, because it's so easy to add people.
Yeah, you want to reduce your customer acquisition cost, right? That CAC number is the number everybody wants to get down. Well, the way you do that is by increasing your customer lifetime value number and your retention number. And it's a math
Exactly.
problem, truly,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
Let's get
Oh my.
we're getting real now. And the ugly truth is that journey maps are hard and they get your hands dirty and they take forever to create. Like,
Not.
say for a typical B2B or even B2C company that wanted to build and execute a journey for one segment, one top segment, let's say. What would that process be with SuiteCX from start to finish?
Sure. So we could do an agile map from start to finish of an end-to-end journey, say an inch deep and a mile wide, in 3 days.
Sure.
Right? So pretty straightforward. You get a group of all the grizzled adults in the room, maybe a few kids, and you can do that virtually. I'm about to do a video on how to do a whole CX project virtually, and I'll share that with you so you can distribute to this crowd.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, literally, we've been forced to do it in the last, 4 months. There's no other way. So the initial thing is do a little homework. If there's somebody's got a voice of the customer program or any kind of data like that, if they've got an idea of what their life cycle, meaning that path is, don't know the names of their departments and their channels, you can set up an infrastructure on SuiteCX in about an hour, right? You set it all up, you do lifecycle department channel, and then you start filling in what is it that the customer is doing. Now that's the hardest part, not what you want them to do, not when you interact with them. Sometimes I'm forced to actually do that first because people can't get outside their own heads of outside in. But in any type of organization where you could be buying the product, like telecom or banking or whatever, it's a little easier. So you just walk through, what do they do next? What do they do next? And you can just put little dots up on the screen as they go through. You give people a little break, they come back and say, which are the most important ones? Make those bigger, right? Why are they the most important? Is there any emotion associated with that, fear, excitement, or whatever? Okay, and then you go back through again, you say, which ones are we not doing well? Or which ones are pain points from the customer's viewpoint? Not necessarily the same thing. So in a morning, you can have a map with that basic information in it. And then you can come back and say, what data do we have that proves this, right? So with just something like Google Analytics, where you know how many people are dropping off from step to step, right? A lot of people, that's all they have.
Mm-hmm.
You can put sticky notes there and say, oh, this is kind of interesting. You're losing 70% of your people right at this particular moment. Let's take a pause and see what that looks like. Let's pull up the assets you might be sending, or the offer, or what are you doing at that moment that is causing that severe pain that someone's going away.
And of course, on the flip side of that, when you're trying to remedy the issue, who knows what might be the right approach? If you can find that customer in real time, it could be a retargeting email with the right offer.
It could be, right.
It could be a phone call from customer service. It could be, a plan we have to, provide, Amazon Prime type services.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you can do ideation really quickly there, and that's kind of fun as well. We have some clients, especially the ones that have done a fast digital transformation, where they put the cart before the horse. They're asking for people's passwords and IDs and things like that before they ever become a customer. Well, of course, someone's going to get scared away. And then you look over at the product manager, and the product manager asks the UX person, why did you do that? You're scaring away the customers. And they said, well, it was the #1 requirement on your requirements document. Right? And they said, well, I didn't mean that. He said, well, you asked for it, and that was the thing I did. And it was beautiful, but it was, the timing was wrong, right? That is a piece of, you were talking about orchestration earlier. That's a really critical piece of getting cadence and timing right as you go through a process, especially if there isn't a human involved. Us humans are really good at sensing things like that and fixing them. Computers, not so much, right? So,
New story, and I think that might be heralding a technology show coming up in the near
oh,
future.
cool.
Um,
So yeah, so you can do this and literally come up with findings and recommendations to improve an experience in 2 days max that will significantly fix key problems. So it's not as scary as you think, and it's not a 6-month trudge into the hinterlands to document every single speck of things that happens, because most of them aren't so important.
And that's why you're a leader in the Forrester Wave. Listen to you. 2 days and done.
Yeah, well, they get excited and they start wanting to say, so what if we do this? But yeah.
Nice.
Oh, so what do you think about that? You've approached this as well, Megan.
Yeah, I find if I don't have something like SuiteCX, which often I don't, I have distilled the mapping process down to a spreadsheet
Uh-huh.
and 8 hours, not necessarily continuous 8 hours. But what I found is the key is having just what you said, people from different functions in the room talking to each other, and just exactly what you said as well, just without the benefit of the amazing tool that means a lot less typing and manual nonsense on the back end of managing it all. But just keep asking the question, then what? Then what? What happens to the customer? What do they see? What do they do? And constantly just reminding people that this is about what the customer does and what happens to them. Don't worry about what happens to you. Let's just talk about what we know happens to them. And if you can keep people on that path, that timeline's great. I think the benefit of technology, though, is what you said is now you can make that happen online. You can just do a virtual workshop easy, right?
Yep.
Shareable and
And I
editable
can
and brilliant.
and I can take your spreadsheet and load it up at break. If you've just done a simple spreadsheet, you follow a couple little rules, I can roll that up and you'll have a map at break. So I see a match made in heaven.
Oh, I've always thought it's an amazing tool. Just
well,
if I
it
haven't
is
gotten my
just a
1%
tool.
through.
It's the brains and the inquiring minds and the innovation and the people fighting with each other of what's more important that really brings life to the whole thing. The tool is just a piece of the overall diagnostic process that allows you to put all that information in one spot. Because you remember the old days of the Visio drawings where you had a Word document that had for every touch, and then you had another file, a table for your findings and recommendations, and then you put it in a spreadsheet so you could rank it, and then you did a PowerPoint to present it, right? So if you can just like squeeze all that in one spot, that's what the tools today do, which and then they make them virtual, so you can do voiceovers and all sorts of sexy things.
But don't you find having that group in the room too, I find people leave those sessions so energized and so excited about the simple changes they could make to make their customers' lives better. I find that. I think it's a great moment.
Especially the ones that don't think they're customer facing. When you drag the legal or finance people into that room and they're kicking and screaming, no, don't let me go, right? I don't touch customers. I can't do this, right? And they get in there and they realize that, gee, their extra 4 days of reviewing a contract is the make or break if somebody is actually looking at two different big B2B solutions. Or the finance person not knowing what a contract should look like from an IRR perspective, and they come out learning how important they really are to the business. So and others start looking at them as well, and I think that that's always fascinating, and then of course always evil IT gets a bad name always because they've got so much on their plate. So they start telling everybody, well, gee, if you want me to do this, then I need to stop that. And giving the department funding for IT is always fun for new projects, because then, of course, they swivel away from their technology. Oh, look, I have an internal customer. So yeah, I love the dynamics of having a team in the room, and you can still do it, over Zoom. It's not still quite the same, but it's kind of fun. So people are are learning new things, and I'll be really interested to see what happens in the future after COVID to work from home. I think we're going to have a whole lot more of that.
Yeah,
Agreed.
without a doubt. Go ahead,
Mm-hmm.
Colin.
Oh, you're back. Look at that.
I'm back. Well, wow. Did I go somewhere? I don't know. You know, what intrigues me the most is the test and learn and A/B testing piece. Because sure, I mean, once you've figured out that you need a different treatment for, let's say, a top customer segment, and maybe it's a motivational or attitudinal segment that you're looking to provide a different experience for. You've got to come up with the right strategy, right? And you've got to test it. And it may be that you think that all the creative should be blue, right, for our best customers. And it's intriguing to me that there's a way to catalog those findings and iterate on those so that you can either prove or disprove those hypotheses, and then, you know, continue to optimize down to the right treatment for those right segments.
Absolutely. And that's where journey orchestration is so strong, because with the technology we have today, you could be simultaneously testing all of that rather than doing what a lot of people have done is, you know, you just have two and you have the champion and the next one, and then you have to do that in an iterative fashion. With our new technology, it's smart enough to know which is getting more heat, so to speak, than you could put 5 or 6 things out there, all the colors, see what people are hitting, and then quickly distill down to 1 or 2. So that test and learn has been definitely speeded up by technology, and understanding the needs and behavior of the different groups. You can also test messaging, you can test offers. It's always fun to see if somebody's going to respond to last 3 or discount or bargain basement, which works best for each product if you're in a retail environment. So that is really fascinating. That's where I lovingly call it psychology meets technology. Right, because there's all sorts of interesting factors and the channels that you're on, right? So making it entertainment and mobile as compared to something a little bit more cut and dry on a computer, you can actually then test using Jira or user testing, and you can actually see where people are looking so that you can move things around on the screen to make it a better experience that way too. So there's tons of interesting technology once you've kind of gotten down the path a little bit here, doing that test and learn. How does that work for B2B? Is that a similar way as in B2C?
I would say for marketers, for sure, probably not as widespread as I would hope it would be, because I think people just sort of throw stuff out there and then their testing is just really their analysis of their campaign or program performance. But
yeah,
but still, it does its job. But that said, no, I think because also now that companies have had to shift away from reliance on in-person events, and that gets skewed by sort of your personal emotional perception of the quality of the event as opposed to the actual performance and throughput of that with your intended audience. Now with everything going digital, it's really trackable. So testing becomes, first of all, so much easier. And second of all, you got more at-bats to do it because you've channeled more of your budget to things that are very easily testable. I think the consumer world's had that advantage for a really long time. Now the B2B world is starting to wake up to it. I just read a great article interviewing 3 CMOs about the pivots that they'd made recently. And one of the big ones was really just saying, hey, this is, you know, even though we've had to get away from in-person events, our performance is the same or better. And I think part of that is because you can learn faster, right? What doesn't work.
Interesting. That's interesting because I was going to ask you about that because it's kind of interesting in B2C. I'm sort of seeing some rebounds to more face-to-face, even if it's using FaceTime or something like that. So if you take Wayfair or some of these other companies, Progressive, they're actually pitching, why don't you call or come in, more than they were a couple of years ago. They thought that everything was going to be digital, and suddenly they realized that it's not. So I'd be really interested to see if that's happening on your side as well. That you know, there was a great old book called Best Face Forward. I think it was a Harvard Business Review that talked about, you know, offloading all the day-to-day stuff for automation, so that when you actually got to a live person, that they were really engaging and they wanted to do something and they fixed your problems and things. So I'm starting to see a little bit of, just like with offshoring and a few other things, a bit of a rebound in retail, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. You know, I've got a teenage daughter, and I will say she prefers to go to the store.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She prefers to go to the store. Now we're not able to do that these days, but
Yeah.
but when we could, you know, it was so fascinating to me. I would have assumed, you know, no one would want to go to a store anymore, but they sure do. And I think
Yeah.
there's
Well, it's social,
yeah,
you
by
know?
all means. And well, and you get to see and test, right? When
Yeah.
you're there, like, does this fit the way I want it to? Does this work the way I want it to? And I think that's that won't go away. I think that's just a human tendency. But at the same time, I think in B2B, they'll up their game when it comes to reliance on technology for engagement, because they have to. But I think then it'll show them, oh wait, this is actually better in many ways. But what I think it'll lead to, and what we're already seeing with, I think, a lot of the information coming from fast growth companies that call themselves product-led growth companies,
Right.
right? It's because they are taking all of the friction out of the product experience and really focusing on the customer to say, what does this person need and how are they using our product, and learning and changing and adapting. That kind of behavior, I think, will have to become pervasive. For the same reason that all the good experiences online and offline in B2C have then changed the way the B2B does it. Now B2B has this whole movement around product-led growth that's causing them to think more about how the whole experience comes together.
Fascinating, which is why they need to map it.
Well, and that I can't believe isn't more of a cornerstone of product-led growth, honestly.
Mapping, testing, timing. Time is another big factor, because, you know, in B2C now, we're all into that instant gratification where the Amazon person and the, everybody comes to our doors for the 4 golden retrievers with cookies because they know that they need to get by. But your relationship has now become with the delivery person in retail, and how fast can I get it, as compared to a relationship with the store clerk. So it's fascinating that is also changing rapidly.
Absolutely. One of my neighbors puts hearts inside of her mailbox so that when the mail carrier or the delivery person opens her mailbox, they see a heart thanking them.
I put kind bars in and water because we live in the South.
There you
go.
So
I love it.
I don't want to stop the dialogue, but we've come to the end of our time. So many good points, and it really points, I think, to the need for all companies, B2B and B2C, right, to be more thoughtful and mindful, at least for maybe their best segments or top, value segments.
Most global segments.
Have an orchestrated experience, and you'll get the results you need.
Absolutely. And the other thing about all of this is, if people just go back to basics and tie it to, again, as we were talking before, first growth, retention, and then acquisition, they'll have a really firm footing in understanding and telling their senior leaderships why they need more money to do it.
Well said. Well, I want to thank, first of all, our guest, Valerie Peck, founder and leader of East Bay Group and SuiteCX, giving us just a fascinating look at the changing terrain, and I think accelerating momentum of journey mapping in customer experience, not just marketing.
Been a pleasure. I love you guys.
And of course, I want to give a big hand of applause, if that's the right way, to my new co-host, Megan Heuer. Megan, please keep tearing at these subjects from the B2B perspective.
It's my pleasure, and I appreciate you including me, and I can't wait to see what mask you come up with next time.
That sounds like a gauntlet that's been thrown down.
Oh, yes, it has.
Uh-oh.
Until next time, everybody, eyes on the stars, but keep your feet on the ground.